Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for joining us. Could you start by just introducing yourself and telling us where you're coming from?
My name is Mark Decker. What am I? I'm the school director. It's a Friday afternoon. I'm the school director here for AISN, which is the American International School in Nouakchott in Mauritania.
Fantastic. Yes. All right. And you've been there starting on your third year. So thank you for joining us for this project. Let's start out and talk about finances. Can you tell us some advice, some guidance, some approaches that you found to be successful in terms of your financial planning and sustainability in small schools?
Sure. So obviously finance is pretty much 100% driven by enrollment. And so we don't have really any other sources. We have a small amount. We're supported by the Office of Overseas Schools, a very small amount of about $40,000. And the other challenge we have is we're also constructing a school. So when I was hired here, this is about my sixth school construction project in my career. And the board, I think, brought me in here because they wanted to start this footprint for a new campus. And it's built on top of the existing campus. And so the finances have been pretty much set up because it was a small school, kind of a QuickBooks kind of format, and just flat out revenue and expenditures. And one of the challenges that was happening right out of the blocks was that finances were being budgeted on a year-to-year basis. And then we were having costs that were coming out of that year-to-year budget that were related to construction. And I had never really seen that in the years that I had been involved in constructing schools. Usually I have a construction budget that's a separate revenue and expenditure from the building type of budget for the year. So that was one of kind of the first goals, was educating the board that rotated pretty regularly, because Nouakchott is not really a destination place. It's usually a beginning place for a lot of foreign hire people. And there's a lot of NGOs and a lot of embassies here that are helping kind of world relief and things like that, help save the children, those kinds of programs that are here to help with social services for people. So people are kind of coming and going. And so the first priority was to kind of educate the board about separating construction costs from building and curriculum and staffing kinds of costs. And we were able to do that in the second year. And so the board created a construction finance account, and then we've been using that. So for an example, let's say if I had $100,000 in capital funds that was dedicated to what would normally be dedicated to library, technology, possible minor furniture, maybe extra textbook kinds of purchases, etc. All of a sudden we're being used for power, electricity needs, for sewer separation, constructing new bathrooms, things like that. And those things really should have kind of been separated apart from each other. So it caused some challenges in that first year, 2 years of a budgeting process. And it's resulted in some red budget kinds of situations, which are difficult to deal with. So the good news is we've gotten that separated, but now we're still kind of living in the ripple effect of those financial conversations. And now it's being compounded by the lack of enrollment on top of it. So it becomes even more challenging. So that was a priority, to kind of get the finances kind of sorted around. We also did not have a finance committee. So there was really, the director was kind of making the decisions, and because of a board member, because board members were rotating in and out, it was kind of just take care of it, and the board, and the director would take care of it, and et cetera. But so it brought a little bit more accountability into the system by having a board member that was on involved in the finance committee, along with the business manager and the director, and then also those reports going to the board, so on a monthly basis. So we're able to track what some of those costs were. So that's kind of in a nutshell, one of the challenges that we faced and some of the strategies we put in place was, let's bring some accountability to it. Let's separate out accounts so that we truly can see what we're spending on educating kids and staffing versus what we're also doing with construction.
That's really helpful. It's I feel like it's a clear outline, actually, the way that you talked through it all
Hmm.
to be able to understand. But the first step was separating the 2 budgets and just
Yeah.
educating your board. It's hard when you have such a transient board as well.
Yeah,
So
we've been lucky to have a supportive board. So that piece is one of the things I've seen in my 34 years of being in this business is if the board chair and the director and the business manager really are not on the same page with processes, then a lot of times it's tough to be successful. But we fortunately have had that kind of we've had people that have come in, even though they may not have a lot of board types of experiences. They've been willing to learn. They've been diving into it and supportive of the direction that the school is going. So
that's really fortunate. You're right, everyone has to be on the same page. That's
yeah,
collaboration, or otherwise you're spending your energy in other places.
the board when they hired me, one of the things they wanted to develop a footprint for a new campus, and it was complex because the U.S. Embassy, let's kind of back up, I guess. The school has been in existence for 47 years this year, and they've been leasing property from the United States government in Mauritania. So the U.S. Embassy existed on the property and then decided to move across town 6 years ago, and they built a brand new U.S. Embassy across town. And then that left in place a footprint that they decided to build the U.S. ambassador's residence on called a chief mission residence. And so in that process, they needed to separate out the school's footprint and the new ambassador's residence. It kind of had overlapped in the past, and they had the same meters. And so these things all need, and because we were a private a nonprofit school, we needed to separate those costs out. And for years, it was just kind of business was done that way, and it wasn't anybody trying to do anything wrong. It was just that business was just kind of, that was how it was done. And then when this new project started, so we've been separating. The first year we separated all the sewer and water and electricity. This particular year, some of the new electricity is getting connected with the old electricity, which is a challenge because there are some of the challenges. There's no electrical standards, and you're hooking into a brand new system that is being coordinated by the U.S. government, which has much more stringent guidelines for electricity than maybe what was in existence before. So getting those electrical phases to match up so that if you flip the switch on the new system and you're hooking into an old system and something's not grounded properly, just like what happens in your bathroom, a ground fault switch kind of happens and it shuts off the breaker. Well, that is what's happening right now, is that getting those phases to match up properly is a challenge. Lots of kind of foundational work. And then the next phase of that is starting to build structures on top of that particular foundation of utilities that have been put in place.
This is a very interesting project. It's different than it's it's a little niche for sure.
Yeah. So it's helped to have the background of building schools. I was involved in a project in Saudi Arabia that was in the shape of a falcon pointed at Mecca, and there wasn't a square corner in the place, and it was all marble, and never saw a budget at all. Built a school for a tribal school in the state of Washington from start to finish on that. And then just my father was in construction, so there's kind of got a
Yeah,
little knack for it, I guess.
some background. Yeah, it sounds like you need it actually. Talk to me a little bit about your the budgeting cycle. Like,
Mhm.
what does that look like for you all?
So it begins typically in March with families that are making a commitment to re-enroll their children in the school. So we
Mhm.
start off with, we have a new system that we put in place called Manage Back,
Yep.
which the school did not have a student information system at all. Everything was kind of just being done by spreadsheets, et cetera, and paper. And so we're in year 2 of that as well. And so just getting a commitment from families that are going to be here. And then kind of checking in on that process with families, and then requiring payment that for those particular services before they start school in August. Our board does not adopt a draft budget in May for the following year, which was another interesting thing for me. I'd been involved in something like that. Usually you adopt that budget for the following year, but there's so many unknowns in enrollment, and the board doesn't adopt a final budget until October of the existing school year. So those are some
Oh, wow.
challenges. Yeah,
Okay.
those are some challenges. So right now we're operating kind of off of a budget that it caught us a little off guard because we weren't expecting to be. We budgeted at 75, which has been a pretty good number for us. We have three numbers that we have kind of worked off historically. If we were at 70, we were probably not real healthy. If we budgeted at 75 kids, then we would be kind of at a break-even point. And if we were at hitting closer to 80, then we were healthier, much healthier. So past directors had kind of said 70 plus 5. They didn't know where the 5 kids were going to land. Our structure for admissions basically is about 8,000 for preschool and 17,400 for kindergarten to 5th grade, and 19,600 for high school, which is actually pretty low for the North Africa region. But it's quite high for AINoukchatt, and AINoukchatt it causes some challenges for especially out-of-pocket payers. That this school is attracting more out-of-pocket payers, and so in the past, the school was really just working with embassy kids, and so embassies pretty much just paid what the school asked for, and there weren't a lot of questions asked. But now that's half the school is out-of-pocket payers, and they're challenging those costs. For those that come from other international schools in North Africa, we're quite low. So they don't really complain too much about that. But for people who've really not been out of Mauritania, they see that as very high. Until you start to kind of point out, okay, well, in Senegal and in different parts of Africa, these international
It's
schools
true.
are probably sometimes 10,000 more in emissions than what we are, or
Yeah.
double, like pre-K. Pre-K in Senegal for us is 8,000, but in Senegal it's 16,000 a year for preschool. So we're at 19,600 for a high school student. In Senegal they're 30,000. So there's some, we raising enrollment or raising admissions costs is kind of prices us out of the market in AINoukchatt. So those are some challenges the board is kind of facing. Do we drop enrollment? We do have a competitor in town that is an American school, but they're non assisted, and so they tend to draw more numbers, but their admissions is about half of what our admissions are. And some of the differences is in certification of teachers and qualified staff, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then we go through the year to get back to on track, basically, of admissions. Kids and parents have to pay before the school year begins, and then they come into the school and they pay half of the semester. Or they pay the semester, and then they pay the second semester in mid-January.
Okay. All right. No,
Yeah.
that's understanding. Context does matter, right? You look and you think, oh my gosh, it's so expensive compared to everywhere else. And then it was the same. I was the head of school in Kigali, and it was the same for us, where we were so much more expensive than any of the other schools locally. But then compared to the other schools on the continent, our fees were not high
Right.
at all. Yeah. So
Yeah.
similar.
So we've tried to kind of point that out in our webpage and have the regional listings of other schools there. But, that doesn't really, if you haven't experienced it, you're looking at your checkbook or whatever. You're going,
Yes.
wow,
Yeah.
you guys are spending.
That's right. Yep. Exactly. That's right. Okay, Mark, just with the last few minutes we have together, will you talk to me about the curriculum?
Mhm.
What types of curriculum are you using? What would you recommend for small schools? Because a lot of times small schools don't have the budget to be able to buy these big curriculum programs. So, what types of advice might you have for small schools around curriculum?
Yeah, and this school was in that. They had not invested in curriculum in nearly 10 years. Many of the textbooks were 2009, 2010 series. And so this was one of the things that the board had as a priority. So I think number one is, what does the board have for a priority? Well, they basically had two things: curriculum, and then construction, and then community, and then just kind of managing through crisis were the four kinds of points. I have them on my whiteboard as the four C's. Don't forget about the four C's. So curriculum and construction and community and crisis.
That's
Anyway,
good.
so in regards to curriculum, the staff recognized that they did not really have coherence in instruction from the very beginning. We used academic coaches because we didn't have administration. We used academic coaches to kind of coach each of the teams, the elementary and the secondary teams, about what it is we want kids to know and be able to do. And so we used a coaching model through that. We had a little bit of PD money that we invested in training on that. We spent a year kind of studying that. And then at the end of that particular year, we asked the staff, what is it that you can commit to for coherence through the curriculum? So instead of bringing your bag of goodies and in your own bag of teaching, what are you willing to commit to as a group? Well, they found that McGraw-Hill kinds of series were a good kind of baseline. They agreed that they needed to have kind of a baseline because people were coming and going. And so we wanted to be able to keep that curriculum scope and sequence mapped out for consistency purposes when the people changed. So that was one of the things, and the board supported that. And so a guaranteed and viable curriculum is critical to move your school forward. And so the staff came to agreement. As a group, we made a recommendation to the board on that. The board saw the staff was together on it. And so we wanted a kind of a textbook series, but we also wanted the technology that went with it. And so a lot of the programs we looked at had both books that were online and books that were hard copy books. Just coming out of the COVID environment, people were really tired of and kind of weary of technology and wanted more kind of hands-on and stuff. We also invested heavily in the library. We raised the budget level in the library so we could bring in more hands-on books for kids and improving our nonfiction types of categories in the secondary. And so that was all great when we were rolling with 78 kids, but that's going to be a challenge to maintain that. And so I guess to kind of put a wrap on it, one, we wanted to see consistency in our curriculum. We wanted to see the ability to be able to have a book that the staff and kids could refer back to, a kind of a hard copy book, just on the weariness of COVID, but also have a digital version of that particular book, so we could expand horizons beyond what in the textbook series. The other thing we invested in mathematics was ALEKS program for mathematics, and we found a lot of good things there. We've also tried to focus more of our usage. So instead of everybody kind of going, I want this and I want that and I want this, let's, kind of bring it together and say, these are the things that we believe in, ALEKS, yes, IXL. And then when we run across these other types of programs, we evaluate them to see so we don't get ourselves too spread thin on things. We don't, we just can't go far beyond those lines.
Yeah. Got to be strategic, right? Yeah. And it can't just be this person wants this and then they leave and that leaves with them, like what you're talking about, the consistency and the transient.
And I think the other piece was the student information system. We've been able to you bring a good point. We're capturing our curriculum. So when somebody does leave, the curriculum's not leaving with them. And so ManageBack is great in that. We're not an IB school. I came out of a couple of IB schools, been all the way through that process many times. But we're an advanced placement school, but we kind of have take a lot of the concepts of IB and we apply them. And one of those things is developing our units around UDL and our lesson plans around units. But when teachers are doing that lesson planning, they're doing that within ManageBack. And last night, that was a big hit with our parents at the open house, where the parents were seeing what the teacher was planning, and then that stays. And the teachers that came in could look back at what last year's teachers had done for curriculum. And so capturing that curriculum is key.
Yep. Yeah. There was a colleague I worked with that called it a suitcase curriculum. When teachers would come in, then they put in their suitcase and leave, like ManageBack and other student information systems. They they help
Yeah.
solidify that where it doesn't happen that way. All right, Mark, any last thoughts before we close up?
Oh, I think there's lots to talk about always in education, but I think, we talked about the primary things that we agreed to. I think consistency, is just kind of a word that kind of keeps coming up and all the things. How do we maintain a consistent budget? How do we maintain consistent enrollment? How do we, be more in a growth kind of environment rather than in a reactionary type of environment? And so those are the challenges. I guess another thing I would just add is working in Africa, very different than any place I've ever been.
That's right.
And so those are some things that I think people need to be aware of coming to Africa. I'm sure America, when the West was being settled, that there were many challenges around power and water and all those kinds of things. Well, we have those in Nuwacha.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Things you don't think about. I know, I remember, like, we were having to plan for, like, if the internet is out all day or if the power is
Yeah.
out for half the day, how do we continue instruction? We can't just be like, "Well, we don't have internet, like, we're just gonna go play games outside or
Exactly.
whatever." And that's not true in so many contexts, but it is true across
Yeah.
the continent of Africa and other places in the world as well. Yeah.
In 20 years, it might be different.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. And there's so many wonderful things about the continent, I don't know, and
Yeah.
make you slow down in a really good way.
I would just, I don't know how much time I have, but I would just say, one of the fun things about when you're building new schools, we're looking at the secondary school, is what might be a better model in Africa than what we seem to think of as like a standard school. And, you look around and some of these schools in Africa are built like ant hills. And, how do they self-cool themselves? Air conditioning and electricity drives me insane because if I don't have electricity, I don't have AC, and when the classrooms are pushing 100 degrees, it makes it pretty tough.
That makes it really tough. Yeah,
So,
exactly. But there are so many things to learn. You're right.
yeah,
There's a lot of things I think from our time living in Africa that now I'm like spending time back in the US. I'm like, why do we do it this way? Why do
yeah,
we not? Why do we not refill glass bottles? What are we doing? Like just these things that like I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of things we learned that they is done much better for sure.
yeah.
All right, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, Lauren, thank you.